welcome to Diverse Joy. It's a podcast that infuses science, practical skills, and most of all, joy into diversity discussions. I'm with my co-host, Dr. William Cox, or also known as Quicksilver from X-Men.
And my co-host is Dr. Amber Nelson, who's weird, wacky, wild, currently dressed as Weird Barbie from the Barbie movie for this Halloween month episode.
That's right.
So, Amber, during October, what brings you joy?
Man, October is such a fun time. There's all the fall festivities, which I love all of them, from pumpkin patching and apple picking and all of the things. But one of the things that I've really enjoyed the last few years is my brother bought a house in this cute little neighborhood. And every year is his wife, him and myself dress up and we just sit together. We watch a movie that we've never seen before. Usually it's like kind of Halloween-y themed. And then we hand out candy to the kids that come into the neighborhood. And it's just like the smaller little thing, like just the three of us sit in his house dressed up and on the couch watching Nightmare Before Christmas or something like that, Halloween Town or Hocus Pocus or whatever that is, and hand out candy. And it is just it's just a magical time. It's so low key. But man, it's just such a lovely time to sit with my family and hang out, and also just get to see all the kids dress up, like all the little ones come to the door and trick or treat. And my brother has always wanted to be like that house on the block that all the kids wanted to come to, because he gets like the king size, or full size candy bars and hands them out. So we have some minis, but mostly full size candy bars. So all the kids get real excited to come to his house.
Yeah, we do that too. We do full size candy bars and decorate. We got one of there's this 12-foot skeleton from Home Depot that a lot of Halloween people went crazy for. Yeah. That's actually really hard to get. Every time they get it back in stock, it sells out almost immediately. But we got one, although we're setting up in our backyard because we want it there year round.
Love that.
What did y'all dress up as last year?
Last year we dressed up as hippies, and so all of us dressed up as hippies, and we were very cute, if I might say so myself. We were very cute. And it was just, the little kids didn't know what we were or who we were. But
kids don't know what hippies are.
Kids don't know what hippies are, but it was so fun. And he puts out like a speaker outside his house, so he plays like Halloween music as they come up. And
how many kids do you get?
We get quite a few, not as many as he wants. I think that they want to have a ton, but they live in a little cul-de-sac, and we get a good number, a good stream of kids coming through.
Yeah, we don't, sadly. So I think the first or second year we got 30. Because we were actually counting. Yeah. But these last few years, it's only been 12 to 15. I think our neighborhood, we have older people whose kids are all gone. Yeah. And then younger couples who don't really have kids yet, or just a few that do. So, but we still go all out for the few that come through. One thing we did is there were kids that had just kind of shopping bags, little plastic shopping bags. And so one year after everything went on sale for Halloween, we went and bought all the nice fabric ones that were on super, super cheap. Yeah. So when we saw someone just using a trash bag or something, we, in addition to giving them candy, gave them a nice bag.
Oh,
and something
I love
they could reuse
that.
and keep. And
that's so great.
Yeah. Wanted to help out kids.
I love that. That's such a great idea. We might have to steal that idea. Yeah, no, that was really fun.
Everyone listening, please steal that idea. It's very nice for kids who maybe their parents aren't as well off.
They may not have
or the parents
access.
Aren't. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's really great. And how about you? What is your joy during October?
Well, everything.
right, exactly.
Definitely. But especially so a couple of our friends, Chad and Jeremy, every year throw a huge Halloween theme party.
That's so fun.
They actually take a week off of work, at least a week. Sometimes it's more, to decorate their whole house, their huge front yard and huge backyard. One year they collected 30 pallets, wooden pallets, and kind of nailed them all together and actually made a maze out of them, little haunted house maze. And then each year they had a big theme to the party.
Yeah.
So one year it was witches versus vampires. And so everyone dressed as one or the other. And I did Ursula the Sea Witch.
I mean, that's
so like
amazing.
like I often do.
Bingo, Disney.
Bingo, Disney. And I guess this is saying not drag, but it still counts as mentioning drag. So another diverse story bingo. So I don't really do drag, but I did basically a male version of it, and we'll stick pictures up in the video for people to see. So I was a guy Ursula. I loved it.
Love it.
And then last year, 2023, it was Neon Nightmare. So they did black lights everywhere and blue and blue lights, and people dressed up and had neon glowy kinds of things in the dark. It was really cool. So always look forward to that. They are very crafty and inventive, and each year they kind of build like 1 year Jeremy built these full-size giant haunted scary trees, and so then he brings them back out every year, and so each year he's building new things. So there's more and more and more.
That's so cool. What's the theme this year?
This year is Gothic Halloween. So dark, black. What's his name? Who does Nightmare Before Christmas? And Tim Burton. Kind of. Yeah.
Okay.
Gothic.
That's so fun. I love that. That is jealous. I'm jealous I'm not going to be here for it, but I will allow it, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. And I guess this is a good time to mention, follow Diverse Joy on social media, at Diverse Joy on Instagram and X and Threads, and the Diverse Joy page on Facebook, because once this Gothic party happens, I'll remember to post some pictures of that.
Awesome.
And we're trying to up those socials. So like and follow, and subscribe. All the things social media people say.
all the things we're supposed to say, but don't.
Yeah. All right. So so last year for Halloween, or last season, I should say, for Halloween, we did stuff kind of related to costumes that we wanted to wear and talk about representation in the media. Last year it was specifically representation of interracial couples.
Right.
This year we're kind of, I guess this is our tradition. Maybe every season our Halloween episode will involve something in media representation. But this one's going to relate to what you're wearing as Weird Barbie from the Barbie movie.
Yep.
And I'm from the X-Men, and so we'll talk about both of those things and how they relate to our topic. But Amber, you wanted to start off a bit. So we're going to be talking about the power of analogy and representation, and you have some stuff about Weird Barbie and the Barbie movie. So take it away.
Yeah. So, I think that there's lots of opinions about the Barbie movie, but for me, and now it's, about almost a year old at this point, but I have always loved Barbie and have always been a Barbie girl. Growing up, I had all of my grandmother's Barbies. So I had these, and my mom's Barbies. So Barbies from the 50s. And I've just always loved playing.
You're a third generation Barbie girl.
I'm a third generation Barbie girl. And so, I've always loved them and was really looking forward to the movie. And again, even outside of any kind of expectation of the movie, there were things that I got out of it that I was not anticipating. One, I was really looking forward to seeing the diverse representation of Barbies, which are in this movie really explicitly with, larger, plus size Barbies and, different color Barbies, different abilities. There was a lot of explicit representation in the movie. Mm-hmm. And there's this part of me that's well, obviously I see myself in the Black Barbie, which was President Barbie in the movie. It was portrayed by E03, who did an amazing job.
Oh, she's so good.
So good. Everybody in the movie did a really excellent job, honestly.
Ncuti Gatwa, who's also the current Doctor Who.
Yes.
He was amazing.
Yes. I mean, just everybody did such a fantastic job. And so there was really very clear, explicit representation. And then there were these two other characters, which was Alan and Weird Barbie. And there wasn't anybody else like them in the movie. And that's Alan's whole thing was that there wasn't another Alan. It's just Alan. As I watched that movie, I really started to see myself more in Weird Barbie and even in Alan than in maybe some of the more explicit representation.
And just a brief explanation, just in case anyone's not seen it. So in general, like the Barbies, they're not exactly cookie cutters, but they're all kind of very along the same lines. And then Weird Barbie is one where if you ever had like a little sister who drew all over Barbie's face
or brother,
cut her hair, or brother, or whatever sibling, and it's kind of the deformed or odd Barbie that isn't perfect and pretty,
right?
Essentially,
yep. She's been played with a little too much, and it reminded me. My brother used to take my Barbies and play with them a little too hard, and he liked to give them tattoos, as he used to say, and color all over them, or chew their hands or feet off. Anyway, so that was weird. That's Weird Barbie in this movie.
And in the movie, she's kind of like off to the side. She has a different, she's not in the main Barbie neighborhood, essentially. And it's kind of like she's the weird old witch on the hill sort of vibe to her.
Exactly.
And you found yourself identifying with that.
Yeah, I really found myself identifying with that.
The weird old witch on the hill.
I'm the weird old witch on the hill. And I sat with that, like, what is this about? And my friend, he dressed up with me, and he dressed as Alan. And it was just really interesting as we were talking. He's Latinx and I'm Black. And we were just talking about like how it was really interesting that the characters that we saw ourselves in were these two characters that lived in Barbie Land, were part of Barbie Land, but were also like not actually part of Barbie.
And we're both played by white people.
But there was just something about the representation of being part of, but not quite being part of, and seeing ourselves in that area of representation, even more than maybe the thing that was quote unquote meant for us to see ourselves in, right? We saw ourselves in these other these other characters that had a totally different narrative underneath it. And I thought that was really interesting for us. And there was something about Weird Barbie that her whole like spiel, her whole shtick was really getting people to accept themselves like as they are, and not to try to be this thing that they're quote unquote supposed to be, to kind of like shed those things and like embrace the weird of what you are and who you are. And I just think that there's something really beautiful about that.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. And that movie had, so many great things about 100%. It. But I definitely felt affinity with Weird Barbie and Alan too. Yeah. So spoke to me in a similar kind of way.
Yeah. Well, I think that, and going into this idea of the analogy piece, is that there may, whether intentional or unintentional, that there were these parallels to different, ways of being and living that were representative through Weird Barbie and Alan, that maybe, again, weren't explicit, but were definitely folks connected to. The narrative was connected to.
Absolutely. And this notion, the kind of power of analogy in representation, every episode we end with a kind of media recommendation. And sometimes there are things where it's like, okay, this is a story, say, by Black creators telling their stories. And so not as much analogy. Right. But there's actually a lot of learning and thinking that can be inspired by media representations.
100%.
Like you're saying with Barbie. I think science fiction just in general is another huge thing. The whole kind of concept of science fiction is imagining a better world or a different world or a more advanced world. Right. And I'm not going to go into my whole Star Trek spiel that I did last Halloween, but like Star Trek, for instance, they'll encounter an alien race, right? And then it will like the alien race will maybe have two colors, or there's a famous old original Star Trek episode where it's this alien race that they're kind of split down the middle, and they have black on the right side and white on the left side, or the reverse, and then they were racist against each other based on which side was black and which side was white. And it was very clearly and explicitly an analogy for racism and so on. And so kind of sometimes when we're dealing with issues of race, sexuality, all these kinds of diversity and inclusion topics that we talk about on this podcast, sometimes it's a little too close to home to see a kind of direct representation of it. like if you know a movie's about racism, it's like, oh well, buckle up.
Right.
But when it's couched in analogy, sometimes it kind of can disconnect people from the immediate intense emotion where they're better able to kind of learn, consider the messages and so on.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of movies. Like, again, I think that there's two sides. There's one that's like the really explicit, like, hey, we're trying to tell this story or provide this analogy. Yeah. And then there are these like implicit ones or like ones that people derive and find that meaning in and of themselves. Right. But it reminds me of, again, Disney. Disney.
Mark it off on your bingo cards.
How many times does Amber say Disney in this episode? But the two movies that come to mind, one is Zootopia. Okay. And the other is Elemental. And both have these like analogies and ways in which they talk about kind of hard topics and diverse topics without using those words and without using that and really give this opportunity for people all ages and ranges to like consume something and learn this lesson about like, again, what differences are and how we manage them and how we treat people that are different or other animals that have different, literally different stripes or whatever.
Yeah. So Zootopia, just in case anyone hasn't seen it, it's the analogy that Amber's getting at is it's about power and privilege. And so it's basically essentially the predator animals. So the more carnivorous animals versus the prey animals,
right?
Like, bunnies or cows or whatever. And there's this huge kind of shift in this society where they're all living together now, but they also have kind of this trauma from their history and their ancestry and negotiating like, oh, are all predators evil?
Right.
And it definitely has some parallels to talking about like white privilege or male privilege in modern society. Right. And I think Zootopia does it really well.
It does it really well.
And it's the main two characters. One is Fox and one's a bunny.
Right.
And them finding their friendship together and having to work across prejudices in both directions. Absolutely. So prejudice against, all predators are going to be awful. Or
of course they're going to be terrible.
I thought it was really good too.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you brought that one up.
Yeah.
I haven't seen Elemental yet.
You have to see Elemental. Elemental is really a story of immigration and like an immigrant family trying to establish themselves and what that looks like in like the disparity again of those who maybe come from means and those who maybe come from that have immigrated to this space and like what the differences of their living conditions and expectations and things are. And it's just, again, it's a beautiful storytelling, really great analogy, and lots of things that people can derive from it, whether that's the intent of the film or not. And there's so much of that, and how many of my students and my friends and colleagues who watched the movie and were like, oh wow, I wasn't going in expecting to get that level of representation from fire and water. Like
our producers flagging us down. Yes.
So based on the trailer for Elemental, I was like,
right.
I feel indifferent about this.
Yes.
And then I watched it while Will was out of town and I was like, this is a really adorable movie.
It's so good. It did not
get the immigration thing,
yep.
I wasn't expecting at all.
Right.
Like, it was just so good.
It's unexpected. It did not get the attention that it deserved. It has not gotten its flowers. It's a fantastic movie. And again, people don't go into it expecting to get that narrative or that story out of it, but it's just so good.
Something else you said that I want to draw more attention to. So I think like Elemental and Zootopia, these examples, I think the creators were trying to put that in there.
Right.
But something you mentioned is that, not only does the audience not always expect it, but sometimes it's something the creators don't even expect.
Right. Yep.
So that makes me think of Star Wars. So more diverse story bingo. We're talking about Star Wars. But like Mark Hamill, the actor who plays Luke Skywalker, has said in interviews many times that there are all these people who come to him and say that they see them, LGBT people who say they see themselves in Luke Skywalker and see him as kind of a gay character.
Yeah.
And Mark Hamill has said, that wasn't necessarily an intention, but if Luke is gay to you, then Luke is gay.
Then Luke is gay,
like because you're seeing that. And so things with him, being in this rural farming community and wanting to be a part of the bigger galaxy and all this stuff. And people really saw that. And like, I had never thought of Luke as gay, but like when I started hearing how other people had it, I was like, oh, like maybe that informed my heart a little bit in a way that I didn't fully realize.
Yeah. And I heard a lot of similar with Alan in the Barbie movie. Yeah. And again, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I've heard a lot about that that connection with the Alan character as well.
Yeah. And you know, I think all this stuff, it does good work for people, for us, you know, kind of learning about these kinds of things. And just briefly going negative, you know, there are then, especially in today's culture, there's some toxic fans who, like we mentioned in the first episode of this season, like went after the acolyte for being, quote, too woke or whatever. Right. And, you know, they're doing the same thing with Star Trek. So modern Star Trek saying like, oh, you're dealing with all these social issues, like trying to force things. And like, people who are kind of thoughtful about media are like, you know, sci-fi has always been quote unquote woke. Sci-fi has always been about imagining a better future and how we can overcome social issues. And so this isn't a new thing that's being forced. Like the creators want these messages. And 100%. So, you know, I think we should try to receive them positively and think through them. Think through, well, did they do a good job of portraying something or not? Also, maybe not always. Maybe it doesn't resonate. And that's okay too. But let's have these conversations. Also with the power of analogy, I want to talk about Bluey.
Bluey, which I have been like meaning to watch for a while. And it's been on I'm like, I don't know. People say it's good. And then I got here and we watched some episodes and I was like, oh my gosh. This is so great. And now I get to use it with my kids, my patients, and use it as an example.
Yeah. And so for those who don't know, Bluey is a show about cartoon dogs.
Australian cartoon
dogs. And in theory, it's directed at kind of maybe 6-year-olds or somewhere around that age. But it has a ton of adult fans now because it's really high quality. It has, you know, humor that's directed at adult age people that, you know, probably gets missed by kids. But some fans, and so Eric Roman and I don't have kids. Right. Nor does Amber. But I don't work with kids, but still just love the show. It's heartwarming, teaches positive lessons. Some of the adult fans have said it's not really a kid's show. It's a show for adults that you can also watch with kids. Because it has really good messages about parenting and 100%. Showcases parenting techniques and
strategies.
While we're talking about this kind of use of analogy, you know, they're dogs. They're not people. But they experience real emotional journeys and face real problems that kids and parents face. Like we just, right before this, watched an episode where Bingo, the little sister of Bluey, like her dad was playing too rough with her. Yeah. And she kind of had trouble finding her voice to speak up about it. And then like it showcased like her being upset and her mom noticing she was upset. And then her mom was like, well, what's going on? And she was like, oh, dad was too rough to me. Yeah. Too rough with me. And the mother was like, well, did you tell him?
Right. Yeah.
The way they frame it. And this is the analogy. Yeah. Did you use your big girl bark?
Did you? Yeah. Yeah.
and Bingo was like, no, I didn't. And so the mother was like, let's have a conversation.
Let's talk to dad.
And talked to the dad. And, and then the dad was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Let's practice. And I mean, it is like a masterclass in parenting strategies.
It truly is.
And one thing I wanted to say about this. So research shows, you know, kids actually, like little kids especially, don't learn from like media and analogies just from watching. Like if you just park your kids in front of the TV and walk away, not a great way for them to learn. But they can if you, as a parent or an adult in a kid's life, talk them through it afterwards. If you help them see, oh, you know, this happened with some dogs, you know, whatever. But that's just like you and your friends in real life. Or like you can see, oh, remember last week when you weren't sharing your toys? Right. If you can understand how Bluey felt when she didn't get shared with, that's how your friend felt when you weren't sharing. So there's a very crucial role of parents. You can't just count on analogies in media getting absorbed by kids. You have to help walk them through it and see how the lessons apply in real life.
Which is also helpful. I mean, again, just as a pediatric psychologist throwing this in on top of that, is that there's also then been this long lasting kind of thought about exposure to media and exposure to TV that's going to cause kids to do or one thing or another, but really the role of the parents in what kinds of media that they're consuming and how the parents are talking about it and training them with whatever they're watching is going to be the thing that makes the biggest difference for them.
Totally.
Yep.
So we need to take a little break. We have a little bit more to talk about when we get back, but we'll be back in a moment.
Be back in a minute.
So my costume.
Yeah.
So I'm Quicksilver from X-Men Age of Apocalypse.
Right.
But the X-Men also are a great example of this use of analogy and representation.
Right.
So originally the X-Men back in the 70s and 80s and 60s were specifically designed to be kind of an allegory or analogy for the civil rights movement. So if anyone doesn't know what the X-Men are, they're in this fictional world, they're mutants. They're essentially a different quote unquote race of humans, and they face lots of persecution and oppression. And so, it's a superhero thing. It's, able to be entertaining and fun in that way, but also deals with some of these lessons.
Absolutely.
And part of the thing that happens with mutants is they get born to families of normal humans, but people who aren't mutants. And that ended up really making them a big analogy for the LGBT community as well, because by and large, gay folks, LGBT folks, they're born to straight people. Right. And so that also brings in things like coming out. Right. So like in the second X-Men movie, X02, from a while back now, there's a scene where one of the characters has to come out to his family as being a mutant. And it's very much a scene that looks just like an LGBT person coming out, where he's like, oh, I have to tell you I'm a mutant. And his parents are like, well, have you tried not being a mutant?
Have you tried not being yourself?
Yeah, which is just very clearly this kind of allegory. Right. And then one thing that ends up happening with mutants is they end up finding each other and creating chosen families because they're often rejected from their families, which is also a big LGBT thing.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And also it's not an analogy. It's straight movie, but it's Love, Simon. Have you seen Love, Simon?
No, I have not.
It's a little bit, it's not old, but it's 2010s, 2015, somewhere in there. I'll let our producer double check that. And it's a movie about a gay teenager, 2018. And it's a movie about a gay teenager and just his life. And the thing that I thought was so beautiful about it was, like I've said other times before, about it's a thing without it being a thing. And that was the thing about the movie, was they were allowing him to be a gay teenager without over sensationalizing it. So
it was just a story about his life.
It's a story about his life.
Just happened to be gay.
And he happened to be gay, but they did have a whole scene where his friends were coming out as straight to their parents, and so it was like, well, why do you have to come out as gay, but we don't have to come out as straight? Why does there have to be this whole thing? Yeah. And his parents were super okay with it. They were super accepting. And so it was just this really beautiful, positive story about a gay teenager and his coming to understanding himself and his first crush and those kinds of things. And, but that was reminding me of that, of what did it look like for him to, came out, but also for his straight friends to come out as straight. Right.
Yeah. Well, and that reminds me of, we're just gonna rack up how many shows and movies.
All of the recommendations and movies.
But there's a show. It's on Fox. It's an anime show called The Great North. Have you ever watched it? It's by some of the same people that do Bob's Burgers. And there's it's a family, and one of the sons is gay, and his family's all very, very accepting. But there's this one episode where he's kind of upset about how accepting they are. He's like, other people get to have drama. They get to have big dramatic stories about coming out, and y'all were so accepting. I didn't get to have that, and so they made fake drama where they were upset about it. I love it. And the thing I like about that, this is a little less of the analogy theme we were talking about, but it draws attention to the fact that there is a real problem with kids whose families are not accepting. And it sounds like this movie you're talking about does that too, while not making us have to fully feel that trauma.
Right.
Not be a sad episode or sad TV show. It's still funny and hilarious how they're faking being dramatic
That's
about
hilarious.
it being gay.
I love that.
Or it sounds like, the friends having to come out as straight.
Yeah.
Using that analogy, you can mention or nod to these real serious issues without it just being, well, now it's media time and we're going to learn about something and it being sad, which is not to say we should never do that. But I think the power of the media to have these conversations is beautiful and powerful.
Yeah. And again, like tapping off of that again is, yes, the analogy piece, and also that, like you said, the recognition that there is a lot of trauma in some of those stories. And so often it centers the trauma. It centers the negative. And how can we tell the story and center the joy and not just being gay is not all traumatic. Being Black is not all traumatic. Black love doesn't always have to center around trauma. Black stories don't always have to center around trauma or racism or slavery, right? Like, can we see the story beyond that and be able to see the joy and get other stories from that?
If only there were a podcast out there that people could listen to that kind of embodies this whole idea of centering joy. Let's put a pin in that. We'll see if we can.
I love it. I love it. That's great.
Awesome. Anything else you wanted to get on our primary discussion topic before we get to our next section?
I don't think so. I mean, we gave a lot of media recommendations, lots of thoughts and things that you can check out outside of our official recommendations for today.
I think every Halloween we're going to dress up and talk something about representation. And it's always going to be something different.
For sure.
There's
so many things that we could talk about when it comes to representation. So I love that. We do dress up every episode.
It's emphasizing that we dress up every episode. But it's not necessarily a costume.
Not always a costume.
Although it is so far this season, isn't it?
That's all right. That's okay. I'm okay with it.
Well, we've been told by some fans that they really like seeing the pictures of us in our dressing up. And it brings us joy. So, even though it's an audio medium, we're making it about
Listen. Don't think about it too deeply, okay? We enjoy dressing up. It brings us joy while we're talking about it, right? So you can hear it in our voice even if you don't see us.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Will, what is our question today?
All right, so we're doing our question first, then stories, because we thought of stories that kind of follow from the question. Yeah. So sticking with kind of Halloween month, the question is something that has been a hot button topic for a while. And basically it's, what's wrong with dressing up in costumes of other cultures, or what some people call cultural appropriation?
Yes.
Yeah, Amber, what's wrong with that? Why can't I just dress up any way I want?
Yeah, it's a great question and I can appreciate it. And I hear a lot of times the argument that this is appreciation and not appropriation. And that's a whole other conversation that we can have. But the biggest thing, especially when it comes to a costume, is a few things. One, it can be it's disrespectful, right? And insensitive to a specific culture. It also really can trivialize the really true and real struggles and oppression that folks from that culture have experienced, because typically a person who's dressing up in this costume is not somebody who comes from that background or that culture. And so by you wearing it as a costume really trivializes the experience and the history.
And also sometimes the trappings of a cultural costume are things that are considered holy or sacred or deeply meaningful for members of that culture. And it being some cute little thing that you're donning and you're not giving it that same level of respect is disrespectful.
100%. It actually contributes to the erasure of the deep, meaningful cultural significance of
when that is the part of it. And then other times it's a shallow stereotype of people in that culture.
Yep. Right. Which then perpetuates a lot of hurt and harm for those who do come from that culture. And it trivializes and diminishes one's own sense of self when you're seeing it as something that you can just put on and take off whenever you want to. When that is like this, that's me. That's my culture. This is something that I hold really deep meaning in.
Absolutely. One of the ways this comes up sometimes is what's known as blackface. And just in case anyone in the audience doesn't know, that's kind of a white person darkening their skin and doing an impersonation of a black person. And it has very specific and very crystal clear associations with slavery in the United States. So, I mean, there were white people who would put on what are called minstrel shows where they would pretend to be a black person, and it would play up the idea that black people are unintelligent and silly, and it was specifically used as propaganda to try to maintain, or after the abolition of slavery, to bring back slavery. And so there's some people who are like, well, sometimes there are black folks doing whiteface. Why isn't that wrong? But white folks doing blackface is wrong. I personally would, if it were me, if anyone's asking my advice, not do it either way. But especially when it's white people doing blackface, it has these links to these very deeply offensive and deeply historically harmful, extraordinarily harmful things.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about like folks that want to wear Pocahontas costume, which is why we don't really see that so much anymore, or a Native American costume or a headdress or things like that, that is, you know, again, there were so many cultural significances of that. One, being trivialized, taken and stolen, and then to use that, it's like traipsing around this thing that you stole from somebody, which and like trivializing it.
Last episode we talked about the pretendian,
right? The pretendian, yeah, exactly.
And with that, that brings us into story time. Actually, great setup.
Yes.
Story time is going to continue this. So as always, you do a kind of more negative story, more positive, and then a more positive one to try to bring it up. Also, one last thing on the question. Don't forget to submit your questions to us at diversejoy.com. We have a form there. Send us your questions or ideas or stories. Now that we're entering story time, we love to share them.
Absolutely.
So this more negative story comes from a party, actually, that Eric Roman and I threw to celebrate our engagements a couple of years ago. And it was called the Tea Party. And everything, we do these big themed parties a lot. And we broadly interpreted the theme. So it could be like a British sort of tea party, like having afternoon tea with the Queen, or related to Alice in Wonderland and their tea party. Mad Hatter, yes. Our friend, past guest on the podcast, Sandy, dressed up as the Mad Hatter and was amazing.
They would be amazing at that.
Or the Boston Tea Party. We had one person who dressed up in kind of a British uniform to do that. But in the lead up to the party, in the event online, I was kind of like, oh, well, we mentioned Boston Tea Party, but part of the Boston Tea Party was some white folks dressing up as Indians. And I was like, you know, I don't think I need to mention this. Like, I'm sure most of my, but you know, I was like, just wanted to be thinking of this kind of culture as costume thing. I was like, I just did a post. I was like, please don't do that. Please don't dress up as an Indian character. There was one person who I later found out had been planning to do that before I mentioned it, and then they got upset about it and actually just didn't come to the party. Yeah. And so I guess that's the end of the story. That's the sad thing. Right. You know, maybe I should have thought of it sooner. I would have rather had done that and not, you know, but it. And, you know, when someone is planning on something, they put work or whatever into it, and then you say, please don't do that, or you can't do that. You know, it definitely feels bad. But I think that person just didn't have the context of like this conversation.
And they made it felt like, you know, called out, right? By that, even if nobody knew about it or anything like that. And again, we've talked about this, and even just this season about we're not trying to make people like feel bad about, like, we're gonna make mistakes, and we're gonna be short-sighted in certain things. Like maybe we could have thought about it sooner, but you thought about it, right? You thought about to mention it. And it's okay if you were thinking like, I'm gonna do this, and not thinking anything of it, and being kind of having that highlighted of here's why we're not doing this. This is why, like, no, we're not okay with this. And it's okay that maybe for a long time you've never thought about that as a problem. But now it's being brought to your awareness, and now we can kind of say, like, oh, okay.
And you know, in the first episode of the season, we emphasized a lot that, you know, what we're doing is not trying to control other people's behavior. And I want to draw attention to the fact that this might seem sort of like that, because I'm saying, you know, oh, don't do this. But this is, you know, a party at my house where there's going to be pictures and so on. And it does become a reflection on me if it was that. And so that was a situation where I think it is appropriate to, and this is true if you're an organization as well, like as a university. So where some of this culture as costume conversation happened was with Halloween parties on campuses, where colleges were saying, look, these kinds of things are not okay for our culture. So even though in this case, it was me saying something that was about other people's behavior, it's behavior within what is reasonably considered the realm of my identity, my home, my party.
Well, you're allowed, like, we get the chance to kind of set the expectations and the boundaries of what I will allow in my own home, in my own space. And from don't wear shoes in my house to please don't dress up like another culture in my home. You know, like we have that agency to be able to say, like, in this space, please abide by these kind of guidelines.
Yeah. And so I just want to be clear about that, where it's different from me walking out on the street and pointing at people and saying, you're wrong for doing this. You're wrong for doing that. I mean, you know, we can speak up about things, but it's not. So that was a more negative story. And I hope that friend didn't hold it against me forever. But more positive story. Eric Roman, our good friend Jack, and our good friend Joe went to a big Comic-Con earlier this year, called C2E2. And they had various kind of rules related to cosplay. One of the things, which isn't actually the story, but I also appreciated, was a phrase people are starting to say, which cosplay is not consent. So sometimes people thought if you're wearing a costume that's a bit revealing or whatever, that's really just touching you without your consent.
That's really good.
So reminding them, no, just because someone's wearing something, you know, you should ask before touching them.
Yeah, that's really good.
So again, setting expectations rules. But one of the rules was, you know, changing your skin color to a real human, to the same color as a real human race that is not your own, is not okay. So this is the kind of blackface, whiteface sort of thing. And, you know, it was like, if you're going to be an orc with green skin, of course that's fine. Or a dark elf with purple skin, of course that's fine. But but not a white person putting on blackface or Asian face or whatever. And that was, I just thought it was just perfectly worded, perfectly done. It was clear that it's about real human cultures and races. And yeah,
I love that. I think that that's such a great way of saying that. Like, I can cosplay as any character I want to. As a black woman,
Weird Barbie,
I'm Weird Barbie, who is white in that, right? But I have not lightened my skin. But I can still put on the persona of this and really get into the cosplay of the character, even if I don't match their background. But also, again, just setting the expectation for a Comic-Con to explicitly say that, I really, really appreciate that. Both that and the cosplay is not consent, because that's huge. That's really huge.
And and then I guess that also ties in with like our rule or our statement about our party, you know, setting expectations ahead of time, like saying, look, this is what we're about. This is what we're not about. Yeah. Good way to do it.
Yeah. I love that. So as you know, every episode, we also dive into the habit breaking model and some skills. So, Will, what is the skill we're going to talk about today?
All right. So in the training, you know, we focus a lot on the good ways to do inclusion and bias reduction. But there are some incorrect ways to try to work on bias that we also need to talk about sometimes. So things that people try to do in their goals to overcome bias that actually end up backfiring. So we need to kind of warn people about some things they might be doing that have unintended effects. So that's going to be one of our there are a few of them that we're going to do throughout the season, but the first one today is something not to do. So don't try to just bluntly suppress stereotypes. So what do I mean by this? Well, sometimes people think if thinking of other people in stereotypical biased ways is the bad thing, just, push them out of your mind.
Right,
Just don't think about stereotypes.
Yeah.
Just suppress them. And this actually is a good way to have more bias rather than less bias. So, some analogies here to also stick with our thing.
Yes.
Imagine that I ask you to don't think about a white elephant. Just push ideas of white elephants out of your mind. It's actually pretty hard to do. Kind of the first thing that happens when I say that is probably the image of a white elephant
yes.
pops up to your mind. Same thing happens with stereotypes. People say, well, don't think about racial stereotypes. Don't think about gender stereotypes. Actually, it leads to what we call, what scientists call the stereotype rebound effect. It actually is more likely to bring the stereotypes to mind, and you're more likely to be influenced by them. And we see this in research studies as more bias in people's behavior, more influence of the stereotypes in their judgments.
Right.
And this is something that in clinical psychology we've known for many, many years.
Right.
So someone with depression who might have negative thoughts about themselves a lot, having them just try to suppress those thoughts, just don't think negatively about yourself, doesn't work, leads to more of this kind of bias. And so it's kind of we want to emphasize the positive, but this is something that many people try to do. But instead of just suppressing stereotypes, we're actually better served by acknowledging that stereotypes have come to mind, by saying, okay, if I'm going to be thinking about women as not being very good at science or not being very good at math, that's what the stereotype would make me think. Think that through. Mm-hmm. How would that influence my judgment in this decision?
Right.
And then you can take steps to correct that or make sure that your judgment is based on merit rather than the stereotypes. So we're actually better served by thinking a little bit more about them. Where does the stereotype come from? How might it influence my judgment and behavior in this situation? Yep. How do I want to proceed? Yep. So basically putting the stereotypes on the table and acknowledging this is part of reality because it is. You can never fully erase the stereotypes from your minds.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, it's right in line with all the neuroscience research as well, where it talks about that our brain doesn't process don't very well as much. It processes do better. So, tell me what I should be doing. Not tell me don't do this, because when you say don't do this, I do it, and then right, so Correct. don't think about a white elephant, but the first thing I think about is a white elephant, and so our brain just processes the action oriented words, not the suppressing things. It makes a lot of sense, and we do it a lot in mindfulness and things like that as well, right? So a lot of people have a really hard time with quieting their mind or things like that, because often what they're trying to say is just don't think about anything, don't think about anything, and then their brain just gets flooded with all of these thoughts. And so a lot of times what we'll do is say allow, don't try to stop them, allow the thoughts to come and then release them, right? So in the same way, allow the thoughts, allow the stereotype to come into your mind, and then say well, what is this about, right? And
thoughtful reflection.
Exactly. And a skill that we talked about before, right, is questioning some of those things.
Yes.
Work it all the way through. What does this actually mean? How is this going to change the way I interact with somebody? How is this going to change what I do, how I think about something or somebody?
Yeah. What are the objective data I need to make this decision, to make sure I'm basing it on those data rather than assumptions or stereotypes? Yes. Absolutely. So stereotype suppression is an ineffective approach to reducing bias. And all right, so we are going to take a little break and then be back for our recommendation to wrap things up. So, Amber, do you have a joyful recommendation for us? We've recommended a lot of stuff already.
Outside of the million recommendations that we gave already.
What's our official ending recommendation?
Our official recommendation is, again, Disney
and
Pixar movies, Inside Out and Inside Out 2. So if you have never seen them, first of all, I've used Inside Out as analogy and use in therapy and in my classes for a very long time, about how your emotions are connected to your brain and your body and how they interact with one another. And the first one was just groundbreaking in doing that and was beloved. And
just for anyone who has just never been exposed to these movies.
Yeah.
The core idea is kind of people's emotions are these kind of little people inside them, again, as an analogy. And each emotion, sometimes takes over and drives, what the person is doing. So sometimes you're driven by joy, which we obviously like, but sometimes, anger drives your behavior, sometimes sadness. And the movies explore like the utility of those emotions, like why they're needed, because all of our emotions do different things for us, sometimes very good things, and sometimes can take us astray.
Right. And that all of our emotions are valid and important and needed. And Inside Out 2 is just, oh my gosh, I could probably talk about it all day, but it adds a couple new emotions. Riley, who's the main character in the movie, it starts to go through puberty, and it really just centers on one specific weekend when everything kind of starts and boils up for her. But they've added envy, ennui, embarrassment, and anxiety.
And anxiety kind of becomes the kind of central sort of villain-ish of the movie, where anxiety kind of starts taking over the character completely, and starts driving all of her behavior.
Right. The thing I love about the movie, though, is that it really takes complex ideas around, complex emotions, how we form a sense of self, how we form our identity, core beliefs, like all of these things, and how we can also form an unstable sense of self and what that looks like and how that impacts us and how we interact with the world around us and what that looks like. So we see Riley going through these really natural, like preteen or early teen emotions and experiences and things that adults experience as well, like a panic attack and anxiety, and what that looks like and how we can get frozen and stuck, and how even joy can also experience sadness, that there can be multiple parts we see these things, and that we can be really complex, and we can be more than one thing, which is called a dialectic, right? Like, again, the both and. I say both and all the time, and that's that dialectic. It's not just one or the other, it's both and. I am a really good friend, and sometimes I get insecure, or sometimes I say the wrong thing, or whatever that might be.
Or I believe in fairness and equality and equity, but sometimes can express an unintentional bias. And there are reasons for that. And the emotions that come from it are useful when people feel guilty because they've slipped up and said something that reflected a bias. That guilt helps motivate us to do better.
Right.
So they haven't done guilt as an emotion.
No, but they
maybe
Inside
Out 3.
Maybe they should. Yeah.
So the creators and writers of these movies, they actually worked with real psychologists and neuroscientists, researchers who study both emotions and sense of self, like Amber was talking about. I have a little bit of a harder time enjoying the movies as much as everyone else, because from my psychology and neuroscience background, I'm really thinking through like how accurate exactly is this. I feel like it's a little more work for me. I still was able to enjoy it. And I think I've seen so many people on the internet talking about the anxiety message of Inside Out 2 and how, like, as adults, like understanding how anxiety can run away with us.
Yeah, no, I think that it is, for me, particularly as a pediatric psychologist, the levels of conversation and things that I can pull out to use as teaching and as intervention for my kiddos as well as their parents is huge. And it's just a really great story. And I think it's a more nuanced story than even the first one. And our producer is telling us that there is a mock-up of Guilt as one of the original characters for Inside Out 2. Did you want to talk about it?
The character designer created a couple that didn't make it to the final cut of the film, including Guilt, and Guilt had a lot of baggage.
I love that. So cute.
And so also with all of this and the lessons people can learn from these movies, that also harkens back to what we were saying earlier, right? So especially if we're talking about for kids, just watching this movie, they're going to react to it because they're goofy, cartoony characters and things are funny and amusing.
Yep.
But learning the lessons, I think you need that extra step.
Right.
Because it is, again, our core topic of this episode, this analogy for, in this case, these mental health, emotional related things. Yep. But you need that role of parents or adults to help the kids see how they can learn these lessons. They're in most cases not just going to learn them because they watch the movie. And I'm glad kids have you in their life to help them learn from these things. But also they're just joyful movies.
They're just joyful.
And they are fun.
Visually stunning. It's just fun all around.
And you might be surprised when you learn a lesson.
Right. Absolutely.
So heartwarming and impactful movies, Inside Out and Inside Out 2.
Yes.
Anything else you wanted to say about them, Amber?
No, just watch them. They're fantastic.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm Dr. William Cox.
And I'm Dr. Amber Nelson.
Diverse Joy is produced by Eric Roman Binding with music by Jay Arner. It is accessible as a video podcast on YouTube or an audio-only podcast wherever you get podcasts or at diversejoy.com. Also, follow us at Diverse Joy on most social media platforms. If you enjoy the show, help us reach more people by leaving 5-star reviews or recommending it personally to others. Word of mouth is one of the best ways things like our podcast can reach other people. Diverse Joy is the official podcast of Inequity Agents of Change, a nonprofit devoted to evidence-based approaches to reduce bias, create inclusion, and promote equity. All that good Jedi work! Learn more at biashabit.com. Thank you for joining us. Now, go find your joy.
Bye.
Bye.